What up? So in this video, we are going to, explore JavaScript promises. And this is a very important concept, I would say. You need to understand the syntax very well. And generally, promises you would use to, perform asynchronous programming. I hope you are aware of what asynchronous programming is. Basically, if you are not, it's just anything that depends, which is not dependent on just your own system, but external input-output operation that process is an asynchronous process. It can take even few milliseconds. It can take like an hour depending upon the input output. Okay, so that is asynchronous. Okay, so JavaScript does not wait for that asynchronous operation to get over by default. It keeps on running. So that is different thing. But anyways, here we will focus on JavaScript promises. And then once we get a clear understanding, then we will see an example also. Okay, and to keep things simple, we will take one thing at a time. So here we will be having a synchronous program within a promise, but generally you would be using something like promise with asynchronous one only. Okay, so let's quickly go to the syntax. Okay, so we have it like this. So we use class constructor new promise, and inside this we put in the initial arguments of the constructor. Okay, so let me name this as argument. Okay, I hope you know how function calling works. So we pass in an argument. Now what is this argument? What is the type of this argument, or what is basically what this argument is expecting? Okay, so for that, let's see. So this argument is supposed to be a callback. Okay, a callback function. I hope let's just for simplicity, let's have it as a function. Okay, a function. I hope you know what is a function. It is very simple. Like let's say add two numbers. So this is a JavaScript function. Then we have this is a syntax. So basically here we put in our arguments. Let's say number one, comma number two, and let's here we write the body of the function. If it is a single line, we can just return it like this. Otherwise, we can actually wrap it into square brackets and add a return statement. So both of these are equivalent, and we want to call it. We can just call it add two numbers 2 comma 3, and then let's say we want to run the program promises. So of course we need to console log this. So this is an example of a function taking two integer argument and returning the result. Okay. Now in this case, this argument is a function like this only, which further takes two arguments. Okay, which takes two arguments. Okay. So this argument function that you see here, it will be another function which will take two arguments. Okay, and we will pass an anonymous function which is more convenient. So let's write this function. So it will take two arguments, as I said. So let's say argument 1 comma argument 2, and then it will do some kind of processing. Okay, so let's keep it like this for now. Now what is argument 1? So argument 1 is a resolver callback. Okay, now what is a resolver? Let's say you made a promise. Okay, and as I told you, promises are by default asynchronous operations. Okay, async operations are those operations which are system independent and which take which are dependent on some input output operation. Okay, so promises are by default they fall into asynchronous category. Okay, now let's say inside of promise you perform some operation. Let's say you want to fetch data from Google. Let's say you want to fetch Google Maps data, and then you want to resolve that. Once you have fetched, let's say I make a request to Google servers, give me the location of this particular place, give me the location coordinates, and let's say Google sends me to 23 comma 45, any random coordinates. Okay, I get those coordinates, then I need to resolve this promise with the value of these coordinates. Okay, so then I would use this argument 1, which would be a resolver callback. Resolver callback meaning I would do something like argument 1 and then pass in whatever value I want to resolve with. So I would do something like I will pass a object latitude 23 and then longitude 45, something like this. Okay, so this is a resolver function and this is how you want to resolve a callback. All right, and since this argument one doesn't make more sense, so actually we should use the terminology which is used, which is called resolve. Okay, argument one is resolve. All right, so here it will again. So I am going to resolve this promise by this value. Okay, now let's say I have a bad internet connection, or for some reason, I have a VPN which is not letting me connect with Google. Okay, in those cases I want to ensure that something should happen there also, right? So there is where I use something called reject. All right, reject meaning for any random reason, whatever it is, the promise failed to complete. Okay, and when it fails to complete, then you want to reject. So for example, I want to reject it with a message, let's say error promise failed to complete. Anything, it could be anything. It should be as descriptive as possible so the end user understands it. Okay, so this second argument is the rejection. Whenever for any reason if the promise fails, what is how you're going to reject it, what is the value you're going to pass, that comes under it. Okay, so now since you understand what is this resolve and reject, let's try to write our first promise. Okay, so let's just get rid of this const first promise equal to, see that I'm going to follow the same syntax, new promise. So I'll use new promise, then I will pass in these two callbacks. So the callbacks, these are as it is, so let's copy it from here and put it like this. So we have resolve, we have reject, and inside this we need to do some processing. Okay, so let's keep it super simple. I'm going to take the current timestamp. Okay, so time, I'll just use current timestamp equal to new date dot get time. I hope you are familiar with this thing. Basically, this is a JavaScript date class which will give me the current timestamp. It comes into some big number. It is some 1786, something like this. You can always go to browser. Let me quickly and open your command prompt. I mean the browser console, and do something like new date dot get time. Okay, and I think I should be small, so you can see that this is the time, and this will be varying. It is based on every millisecond. It gives you the time in milliseconds. Okay, so you can see that it is varying accordingly. All right, so moving back, we get this timestamp, and now I want to check if current timestamp is not even. Okay, which if current timestamp is even, actually let's go with not even, anything is fine. So if current timestamp modulus to not equal to 0, then I want to reject the promise saying that timestamp in millis is not an even number. Okay, I want to reject it. I'm just showing you how you can have two consequences, and otherwise I can put else, or I can just do without that also. So let's keep it like this. So we will have resolve with current timestamp equal to uh, current timestamp equal to current whatever it is. Okay, so this is our first promise. We have written our first promise, and since I told you that promise is an asynchronous statement, okay, meaning that it won't resolve immediately. JavaScript will move on and it will wait, even if it is, as you can see, this is all synchronous programming. Still, it will be treated as an asynchronous one because it is a promise which is by default a asynchronous operation, okay, which is treated as asynchronous. Now, how do you handle promise? Okay, so let's understand promises handling. Promise handling, okay. So there are two ways. One is using then catch, and the other one is using async await. Okay, first let's understand then catch because it is very easy to understand. So whenever you resolve a promise, okay, so you will do, let's say here we created first promise. So when we do first promise, then we by default we will get two methods, which is then and also we will get catch. Okay, so what are these two then and catch methods? Okay, these also expect arguments. Okay, so let's say we have then argument, and then here we have a catch argument. All right, argument. Okay, so how do we do it? I mean, what is then argument expecting? Then argument expects another function which basically takes in, so let's write the function. So function definition, again arrow function. Here we will write its implementation. In the argument list, it takes resolved data. Okay, so whatever the promise resolves to. So let's say if the promise was successful, like we discussed here, if the current timestamp modulus 2 is equal to 0, then we will resolve it with this value, right? So that will be passed into the then argument, okay? And then you can use that to perform any operation. Let's say I want to console log promise resolution was successful, and here's the data. And then I want to pass resolved data. Okay, so this is how, this is what then argument expects. And I hope it is very clear what will catch argument expect. It will expect if for any reason promise fails, we want to catch that, and we want to find rejected data. Okay, so we will see promise resolution failed, was not successful, and here's the data, and here we will use rejected data. Okay, so this is as simple as that. We can just pass in these arrow functions, and that is what it is. Okay, so let's try to resolve the promise. First promise dot. So you can see we have three methods. Here we also have finally. So finally again takes a callback. You can see that it doesn't take any data point, any argument like then and catch. And it is basically once your promise is done, whether it failed or whether it was successful, doesn't matter. It will take a callback, and once it is done, you can execute this finally also. But if you have then and catch, generally you won't use finally, because either it will pass or it will fail. There is no any third exception. Of course, if you want to run something which happens in both of these cases, then you will use finally, but otherwise then catch is enough. Okay, so you can see that these methods are automatically exposed. I can use then, and now I need to pass a callback. So I will just copy paste this resolve data that we wrote it here, and let's quickly add it as a callback in the then block. Okay, and if for any reason if the promise fails, we need to catch it, and then we can utilize this catch block also. So let's copy paste this one here as well. So now let's try to understand what we are doing here. We are doing first promise which we created here. We are waiting for it to either resolve or throw an error. If it gets resolved, then we will do a console log. Promise was resolution was successful, and here's the data, and we are displaying the resolved data. If it gets rejected, we are saying it was unsuccessful, it was not successful, and we are also displaying rejected data. Okay, and let's take this guy outside so that we know what is the timestamp. So we will just log it here. Current timestamp is equal to current timestamp. Okay, so this, I hope this code is clear to you. We have created an we have just taken the timestamp. We have created a new promise. We are checking if the timestamp modulus 2, basically timestamp when divided by 2, the remainder is 0 or not. If the remainder is 0, then we are resolving the timestamp. Basically we want even timestamps. If it is not, then we are rejecting it. And then here we are calling the promise execution, and we are using then and catch block. If it gets resolved, then we are displaying this message. If it doesn't, then we are displaying this message. Okay, so let's quickly try to run this program. So you can see that we have a odd timestamp, and it says promise resolution was not successful, and here's the data. Timestamp in millis is not an even number. This is exactly how we are rejecting this promise. Okay, if we run it again, This time it was even, and so it is saying promise resolution is successful. And this is totally random, okay? So we can get any depending upon what, because this happens in milliseconds. So unless we run the same program exactly at the same, exactly at the same milliseconds again and again, we will get the data accordingly, okay? So I hope the first concept is of then and catch is clear to you. Now let's look into the other method, which is async await, okay? So async and await. Now to use async await, you must wrap it into, a function itself. Okay. So let's first clear comment this guy out. And here we will have const, because you cannot use await in the global scope. In Node 18 versions, it is going to be supported. I believe there was some news around that. But since if you see, I'm using Node 14, I believe. So here it is not supported. And if I use something like, let's say, result equal to await first promise, then it won't complain here. But I think if I run the program, it will give me error. So you can see that await is only valid in async function. Okay. So let's quickly create promise executor, something like this. So again, we will create an arrow function. We need to specify this arrow function that it is an asynchronous. So we need to put an async command here, async keyword here. And then we need to take result equal to first promise. Okay. So see, if I don't put an await, what do you expect the result to be? Okay, let's try to see result equal to result. Okay. So if we run it like this, so you can see that of course if the promise gets rejected, then we get the error. But let's try to run it once again. So you can see that current timestamp equal to this, and and of course I need to call this one promise executor. So you can see that, the result, it says rejected, this is not an even number, and so on. And if I do it again, it will get, yeah. So it says that it is, promise, because it is a very quick process, so it is resolving it right away. But if it was not that quick, let's say if we have a timeout, so let's quickly have a timeout function here. And don't get too confused by this. Basically set timeout, this is a function which sets a timeout before it starts the execution. So let's say we have a timeout of 2 seconds, it takes this in milliseconds. So let's quickly run now. So you can see that promise is in the pending state, right? So you can see that before the promise execution completes, we log this result, and since it is a pending state, that's why we get promise pending and so on. Okay. Now, if we do a await, that tells JavaScript that stop here, and unless this promise is not resolved, unless this asynchronous operation is not complete, don't go to the next line. Okay. So see what happens here. You can see that the first line has printed, but the second prints after 2 seconds. Okay. So that is the idea here. All right. So this is how you will resolve a promise using async and await. Now, if you see, if it is an odd, then we get that error log. So currently we won't, because it's an even number, but now we will get an error log. So you can see we have got unhandled promise rejected warning. So we need to handle this like the way we handled here in then catch block, right? So for that, we can wrap this in a try catch block. We can just keep like this try, and then we put, let me quickly format this, and then we will have catch error, and then we can do, so here we will get the result, which is basically the resolved data. Okay. So all I can do is I can just copy paste this one here, and that should be good enough. And let me just uncomment this out, and let's rename this result as resolved data. And instead of I think try catch, yeah, I think this should be the syntax. What is it complaining about? Expected a comma. Okay, I think there is an extra bracket here, which is supposed to be like this. So this error would be, the rejected data, the way promise is being rejected. So we can do something like this here and copy paste and sorry, copy paste this one here. So just to make both of these things uniform and save it. Okay. So if I run it now, see how it handles it. So it says resolution was successful, but if I run it for the, okay, again it is an even number. If I run it, it's again an even number. Let's try one more time. Wow, we are getting a lot of even numbers. So yeah, now we got an odd number. So it says, it was unsuccessful and here's the data and it does the same thing. So these are two ways to resolve a promise, okay? If you are clear with these things, how the promise is created, what is resolve, what is reject, and how we can finally fetch the data from the promise, if it was resolved or rejected and so on, and how we can use async await. You can see that this looks more like a sequential programming, and this is more of a uh, parallel programming, asynchronous programming syntax. Depending upon whichever you prefer, you can use that. But yeah, if you are clear with all of this, then you are good with any kind, understanding any type of JavaScript promises. Okay, and here we had it like simple callback like this, but you could actually a simple variable, but you could actually create a callback out of it also. Like you can do it like this also. So basically, this is a callback which takes new on return. It returns this whole promise thing. So now it will be like this, and you will see most of the promises like this only. Okay. So if I just run it again, you will see that it does the same thing. Okay, so we generally use we pass in arguments, and then but depending upon how complicated promises, we do resolve it like this in the callback form and not the form that I showed you before. But yeah, I hope the idea is clear to you about the JavaScript promises. And in case if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the chat, not chat, in the comments, and reach out to me for any queries. I hope this was helpful, and thank you very much.